Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Anything and Everything, the show which acknowledges that everyone has a story. I'm your host and producer, Halima Sharif. I'm excited once again to bring you another segment of our New Orleans Music Legends series, where we have had amazing conversations with such legends as Edward Kidd Jordan and his daughter Rachel, Jermaine Basil, Victor Goines, Donald Harrison Jr., Nicholas Payton, and today we have another amazing guest, Mr. Herlin Riley. Welcome, Herlin.
Hi, Halima. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my absolute pleasure to be here and to have a little conversation with you.
Oh man, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm very excited. Before we get started, I'd like to share with everyone some background information on your journey. A native of New Orleans, Herlin Riley started on the drums when he was 3 years of age.
Yes, sir.
He went through high school, but he went back to drums in college. His authoritative style of melodic percussion is deeply imbued in the fertile creative soil of the Crescent City, encompassing as it does the entire length and breadth of Americans' ongoing musical journey. Herlin emerged from that most creative era of all things rhythmic in the late 70s and early 80s to enliven ensembles of such influential and demanding improvisers as pianist Ahmad Jamal and trumpeter Wynton Marsalis through his commanding yet elegant rhythmic presence. Incidentally, after graduating from college, he spent 3 years as a member of a band led by Ahmad Jamal. He was also a member of the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra led by Wynton Marsalis. He has also worked with George Benson, Harry Connick Jr., and Marcus Roberts. Herlin played a large part in developing the drum parts for Wynton Marsalis's Pulitzer Prize-winning album, Blood on the Fields. He is a lecturer in percussion for the Jazz Studies program at Beanan School of Music at Northwestern University. Now with the release of his debut recording for Mack Avenue Records, Herlin's New Direction is an engaging, wide-ranging recital that distills a lifetime of experience into a swinging body of new music that defines what a big tent the music of New Orleans has always represented stylistically and spiritually. Herlin shares that New Direction reflects a personal transition from being a musical associate with the likes of Ahmad and Wynton to functioning in a leadership capacity, both as a band leader and a composer. Like Art Blakey, he's trying to maintain a certain exuberance by using all younger musicians while helping them develop their own voices. So many great musicians and drummers have come out of New Orleans, and that really defines his personal legacy. Welcome, 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 Herlin. Once again, I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to getting further into the conversation.
Oh yeah, man, we got a lot to talk about, so I don't know how much time you have, but
I got all the time you need. I got all the time you need.
well, since that is, why don't you take us through your musical journey?
Well, I was very, very fortunate to be born in New Orleans and to be born into the legacy of a family of musicians. My grandfather, his name was Frank Lasty. He played the drums, and he didn't play professionally, but he played as a kid. And he was one of the kids who was locked up with Louis Armstrong in the Waves home. So in 1913, he got to play with Louis Armstrong, and later on he didn't play professionally, but he did play, and he continues to play until he passed away. And he played mostly in church, which is where I kind of got my grounding and my start playing the drums in church. But beside that, he had three sons who were musicians. Melvin Lasty played the trumpet, David Lasty played the saxophone, and Walter Popete Lasty, he played the drums. And so when I was a baby, I was pretty much raised in my grandparents' house. And as a kid, as a child, an infant really, I heard the music firsthand because my uncles had a combo they called the Lasty Brothers Combo, and they would actually rehearse in my grandparents' house where I lived, and they would actually roll my crib into the room, and while they were rehearsing, so I got to hear the music very, very early in my life, and it was a part of me, and so I didn't have to go back and research records to understand how to swing or how to play a groove or anything. It was just embedded in me as a child. And so, you know, when I think about playing the drums, you know, people ask me, well, how long have you been playing the drums? And it's like asking a person a question, well, when did you start to walk or start to talk? You don't remember doing all, you know, you don't remember when you started, you just know that you do it. And so the same thing was with me as a drummer. I don't know when I really started to play the drums. It was just a part of me and part of my upbringing. And I remember but I do remember my grandfather sitting at the kitchen table with me with butter knives in his hand, and he actually would beat out rhythms for me while we were having breakfast. He would beat out rhythms on the table with the butter knives, and he would kind of challenge me to do them. And he would laugh when I tried to do them, I would mess up, and he would laugh and oh, that's not it, son. But here it is again. Try it again. So he played it again for me, and I tried to do it again. And you know, and as time went on, and I got older, and I got stronger, and got, you know, a better understanding of the music. I learned how to play what he was playing on the with the butter knives. So those are my very very early experiences as a musician and coming into music. You know, I was one of these kids who I didn't choose music. Music chose me because it was always there for me, and I always gravitated towards it. I remember being as a kid when I saw when I saw the Quaker Oats grist box or the oatmeal box. I didn't see a box. I saw a drum because the pot tops or the pots. I saw drums, and I could hit them and make sounds, and there was a little timbre coming out of the, you know, the pot, the top of the pot was like a cymbal, and the Quaker Oats grist box was like the drums. So I was always interested in playing drums, and that was my instrument from early on in my life.
Wow, you know, and you know, you said earlier, people may have asked, you know, when did you start playing music? And you hear that a lot. But for you and like many others, it was automatically in your DNA. You were exposed to it. But I guess my answer would be it was before conception, you know.
Probably so. I
Pretty-
think so because you know, because of the family, they were already involved in it, and I'm sure my mother also plays music. She played, well, she passed away now, but she played the piano and she played the organ, and she sang in church. So I'm sure that when she was pregnant with me, that she was playing,
Mhm.
and she was playing in churches and playing, you know, in singing, and so it was already a part of me before I was even born.
So you originally started out on the trumpet. What made you switch over to the drums?
Well, I didn't, you know, originally I did start on the drums, as I explained earlier. You know,
Yeah.
being with my grandfather and my uncles, and you know, being in church, and I played the drums. But when I got to when I was about 12 years old or so, my uncle Melvin Lasty,
Mhm.
he was in New York, and he was playing with Willie Bobo, and he was playing with King Curtis, and he recorded with Aretha Franklin, and he was making a living as a musician in New York City. And so he was my biggest mentor as a musician. And so he played the trumpet, and I wanted to play the trumpet like my Uncle Melvin. I wanted to play the trumpet. So he was also my godfather. So when he was in New York City, I told him, I said, man, I want to play the trumpet like you. I want to play the trumpet. So he actually sent me a trumpet from New York City, and I was so happy. I mean, I remember I remember when the trumpet came in, it was all wrapped up in this brown paper bag. I mean, brown wrapping, and you know, and it came to the house, and I didn't know what it was. And I opened the package and I saw this trumpet. It was like, oh man, this is the greatest present I've ever had in my life. I got a trumpet from my Uncle Melvin. And so I started to play the trumpet. I was in elementary school, about the 5th grade or so. And I was starting to play the trumpet, and it just so happened that during that time, um, my Uncle David came he and my Uncle Papi, or we call him, or his name is Walter Lasty, they were playing together. My Uncle Melvin was still in New York, but my Uncle David and my Uncle Melvin was still playing together. And they happened to come to my elementary school, and they had what they call a sock hop. which was like a little dance whereby they would have live music and all the kids would play like a dime or a nickel or something and go and get the musicians. And so I was just starting to play the trumpet, but I had some things that I was able to play. I was able to play. So my Uncle David said, "Come on up here with the horn, man. Bring your horn up on the bandstand." This is about a year and a half after I started to play. I was about in 6th grade or so. And so I started to play the trumpet, and that was my first time being on stage with any musicians, and it happened to be with them. And it happened also to be with a musician who leads the Dirty Dozen brass band. His name is Roger Lewis. Roger Lewis, he leads the Dirty Dozen, but he was actually there playing with my uncles at that particular time. And man, so he tells that same story all the time right now. That was my very first time being on stage playing with any musicians. And I was in elementary school, but I was playing the trumpet. And so I continued. I was really serious about playing the trumpet for many years. I played it through junior high school, and then I got to high school where I played it, and then I also, when I went to college, I got a scholarship to go to Mississippi Valley State to play the trumpet. And so I was really serious about trying to learn how to play the trumpet, but the drums was always in my DNA and always at the core of my spirit. So when I started, my Uncle David asked me, he said, "Man, can you play this?" Well, actually, I was playing with my uncle Papi, the drummer. Mm-hmm. I was playing with a band with him, and so it just so happened that this is about 1970, about 75, 74, when I graduated high school. It was just that summer after I graduated, I was playing the trumpet with him, and I was playing in a band. And when we got to this, it was a group down called Vince Vance and the Valiants. We were opening for them, and this was a gig down in Florida. So when that band, the drummer from the band was leaving, they asked my Uncle Papi if he would actually play the drums for and play with them. And he said, "I got to go home because I got a family and I have to go back." He said, "But my nephew can play the drums." And so he said, "Well, who?" He said, "The trumpet player. He can play the drums." And so they auditioned me, and I learned how to play. It was playing 1950s rock and roll music, Duke of Earl and On the Clock and all those kinds of things. So I learned, and so they taught me their book while we were driving from Florida to Texas. I was riding in the car with them, and so they taught me how to play, taught me those songs. And so that was my beginning of playing the drums on a professional level. That was the very first time I did that. And then as years went on, I started getting more and more calls for the trumpet. I mean, for the drums, and less call for the trumpet. The mid-70s was a transitional point in my life where, I got married in the mid-70s, and, I was playing a gig on Bourbon Street where I was subbing on one night for the drummer. Then I was subbing on another night for the horn player. And, it was kind of overlapping, the trumpet and the drums. And then I started, soon after that, I started getting more calls to play the trumpet. To play the drums, and less calls to play the trumpet. And then it just kind of started to snowball, one thing after another, more calls for the drums, less calls for the trumpet, more calls for the drums. And so eventually I put the trumpet aside and really started to focus my energy on playing the drums.
Wow, what a heck of a story. You ever find yourself picking up that trumpet
story
for whatever reason?
I'm sorry, say it again.
You ever find yourself just picking up a trumpet just for whatever reason?
Oh yes, I still play the trumpet. Yeah. But it's for my own, my own personal enjoyment. And sometimes I'll join in this. The last time I played the trumpet, I played in a brass band funeral for my friend Lucian Barberan, who passed away. Yeah, that's right. And so I he and I, when I met him playing with Danny Barker, with the Danny Barker the Fairview band, Fairview Brass Band, which is a band of all kids from 8 to 18. And Lucian was a part of that band. And so when he passed away, I wanted to be a part of the processional, the jazz funeral processional with him, and paying homage and honor to him, to my friend who had fallen. And so when I first joined and I started playing with him, I was playing the trumpet. So I wanted to play the trumpet in that processional. And so that was my last time really playing in public. That was back in February.
Wow.
And so from time to time, I still pick up the trumpet and I still play a little bit, but not too much, you know, outside of my house or in special settings.
I understand. You know, speaking of Danny Barker, I know, you know, among many of your mentors, he was one of your mentors. And because you mentioned Fairview Baptist Church Brass Band, could you expound more on that relationship with Danny Barker and the church brass band?
Well, yes, you know, it was, well, Leroy Jones, who's a trumpet player, and he worked with Harry Connick Jr. for a long time, and he played around New Orleans. But when we were all kids, Leroy you know, he was like the leader of the band. And we would rehearse at his house, at Leroy's house. And it just so happened that Danny Barker kind of formed the Fairview brass band because the church that he was going to was a block and a half from Leroy's house. Mm-hmm. And the pastor had asked Danny if he would form a kids band. And Danny Barker, for those of you who don't know, was a guitar player and a banjoist who went to New York in 1930. And he played with Cab Calloway and Billy Eckstine and so many great musicians of that time. And then he retired. When he retired in the 70s, he came back to New Orleans and he happened to be in church. And the pastor of the Fairview Baptist Church asked Mr. Barker where he belonged. He was a member of that church. He asked him to form a band of kids so Mr. Barker heard Leroy Jones practicing, which was Leroy Jones stayed about a block and a half from the church. So he heard Leroy practicing and so when he heard Leroy practicing, he approached him and approached his parents about, you know, getting some other youth, young kids to come together to form this band. And it just so happened that that band was formed, and there were a lot of musicians who are still playing today who came from that band and under the tutelage of Mr. Barker. And it didn't matter how well you played or if you just, as long as you were interested in playing music and developing the jazz culture of the city, you were welcome. And the band was from, you know, kids from 8 to 18. And so it doesn't matter how much you know, if you could play, if you just had a horn or had some drums and you wanted to be a part of it, you were welcome. And during that time, in the 70s, a lot of the young musicians were, especially Black musicians, they were kind of putting down the older brass bands, because during that time you had the Olympia Brass Band, the Eureka Brass Band, the Tuxedo Brass Band, and several others. I can't call the names of them, but there were brass bands who were in New Orleans, and there were a lot of older guys. So as young kids, we weren't interested in really playing that kind of music. We were interested in playing, you know, James Brown and Earth, Wind and Fire and Parliament Funkadelic and, you know, whatever was the popular thing on the radio at the time. We were interested in that. But so Mrs. Barker kind of reinvigorated us to appreciate our own culture and appreciate, you know, what we represented as far as the lineage of New Orleans music. And as a result, Leroy, later on after that, he formed the Hurricane Brass Band. And from the Hurricane Brass Band, then the Dirty Dozens was developed. And then from the Dirty Dozen, then you got all of these other bands have now come on the scene. And now you see young kids who are on the street now who are just playing, you know, forming their own brass bands and playing on the streets. But that whole, it was really rejuvenated by Mr. Barker and the Fairview Band. That whole style, that whole appreciation for New Orleans culture was rejuvenated by Mr. Barker.
What you said is very similar to what Nick Payton said in the interview I did with him recently. The influence that Mr. Barker had on himself and so many others like yourself. So, you know, that always to the fact that we have such a rich culture in New Orleans, so many great musicians and educators that we couldn't escape it, you know, but it was a blessing to have them and still have a lot of them in our lives today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and I pay so much homage to the musicians who've come before me. There are so many musicians who've touched me from New Orleans and also from other places, but mostly New Orleans musicians have touched me and inspired me and kind of encouraged me and to be a musician. So many, so many. And it's you know, we hear about the ones who are you know, who are popular, like Mr. Marsalis, Alice Marsalis, of course. Kid Jordan was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Dazzle was also another mentor. I had a great teacher, Miss Yvonne Bush, in my high. You know, it was so many musicians who Alvin Baptiste. He was another great musician, so a great mentor. Um, you know, I can go down the list, but I'm sure I'll be leaving some people out. But you know, there are so many musicians who taught us, and it wasn't about, they didn't charge us for lessons or anything. They just shared information, and they would always tell us, you know, to whatever information that we got from them, to pass it on and to share it with other musicians, because the culture and the history of what we're doing is bigger than the individual.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
yeah.
You, who are some of your different drum influencers, mentors? One in particular I'm interested in knowing is your relationship with James Black.
Well, yeah, James Black was definitely one of my mentors, and but my first mentor, as I said, was my uncle, was my grandfather, Frank Lasty, and then my uncle Walter Lasty, and then you know Smokey Johnson was. They were all my uncle Poppy and Smokey were tight. They were good buddies, and my uncle David too. So they were all good buddies. So Smokey Johnson was always around, and John Boudreaux, who he worked with my uncle Melvin.
Mm-hmm.
John Boudreaux, great drummer. Then they had, you know, Ernest Ellie, which, you know, he's still around, and he's a great drummer. And I got, you know, information from him. James Black was definitely one of the musicians who I watched and I studied, and I kept a keen eye on and a keen ear to hearing him and to understanding and seeing how he plays. So, but not only as a drummer, but also as a composer. James was also, you know, he was one of the musicians that, as a drummer, who influenced me as a composer. James Black also played the trumpet, and he played the piano, but he played, you know, he could play the drums. He really could play the drums. But he was one of the people that really that I kept an eye on, and I became friends with James. James was a kind of hard person, though. He wasn't easy to, he didn't easily let you in. He was always he was kind of hard nosed, and you you really had to show him something in order for him to show you something. So I got in James's later life, I got to know him a little better than I did early on. And so he was definitely a mentor and one of the people that I kept an eye on as far as New Orleans musicians is concerned. And so he was definitely one of the people that influenced me in a positive way as a musician, not just as a drummer, but as a musician.
Well, you know, I've heard a lot of stories about James Black from Ms. Basil. She had shared a story on her interview that, you know, when she started playing with him for the first time, she's like, oh my goodness, he's one of those folks that makes you feel intimidated. But once she got it, she was there.
Yes.
You know, and then I remember my brother, not Jamil, but my brother Kareem reminded me that at our I think it was 1977 family reunion.
Uh-huh.
I think it was, I don't even know where it was. It may have been no, it wasn't in Cleveland, it was in New Orleans. That he played at that reunion with my father. And I'm like, oh, you know what? Now that I'm looking at him, he did look familiar. But, you know, I didn't know what I was looking at. I was so young, but as I got older and started paying attention to, you know, the different rhythm and understanding and how the ambiance of different artists, it started making sense and bringing back lots of memories to me. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you know, someone said he was before his time.
He was what?
Someone said that he was before his time.
Yeah,
Hmm.
probably so. Because James understood how to play multi rhythms, and he understood. He had a great understanding of time and how to intertwine different rhythms. And he would kind of play a hard game on the musicians that he played with. He would almost kind of hide the one. He would kind of hide the one. And if to explain what I mean, if the music is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, James would play stuff 1, 2, boom. And so he would kind of hide the one in his playing, but he would come out. He understood. He would play these polyrhythms against the time,
Hmm.
but he had such a command of it. He knew exactly where he was in the meter, and he would come back to the one. And a lot of musicians, if you didn't count or you were good lost. And he would kind of play this game on a lot of musicians where he would play against the time and lose musicians, but he understood exactly what he was doing. So he was really before his time. He played a lot of polyrhythms and stuff that went against the time and he would hide the one and come back to it and resolve it. And if you were there, if a lot of musicians would fall, they would actually lose their place in the music. And James would, come back, but then he knew how to bring them back to the music as well, bring them back to the meter, back to the time. So he was definitely, yeah, he was. I would say he was ahead of his time. He was such a talented man, and it's unfortunate that more people, don't know who he is and are not familiar with his music.
That's true. That's true. Um, let's talk about you and the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. How did you begin playing with Wynton in the orchestra?
That's an interesting story as well. You know, Wynton and I used to argue about being in the Fairview. You know, when I played in this band, he said, "Man, were you in the Fairview band?" I said, "Yes, I was in the Fairview band." He said, "Well, I was in the Fairview too." I said, "Well, I never saw you there." He said, "I never saw you either." So someone came up with a picture. I don't know who it was, but someone came up with a picture. And Wynton and I are playing trumpet together. I'm about 12 years old, maybe 13. Wynton's about maybe 8 or 9. And so there it is, plain as day. Wynton and I are playing the trumpet together in the Fairview band. So it just so happened that, but we didn't hang out, or we didn't know each other in our childhood or our teenage years. As time went on, I knew who Wynton was, and I really knew who Wynton was through his father, and I knew who Branford was through Ellis. Me being about 4 years older than Wynton, as soon as I got out of high school, I was married, and I started playing gigs, and I started playing with people. And so when I was 18 and 19 years old, I used to play gigs with his dad, like 20 or so. I would play gigs with his dad. And I was playing with his dad at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. And I was playing with another great trumpet player from New Orleans. His name was Teddy Riley. Teddy Riley had the Heritage Hall Band. And I was playing the drums with that band on Sunday mornings for the brunch, Sunday 10 to 2. Sunday mornings, every Sunday morning. And so it just so happened that Ellis Marsalis was a part of the band. And so Ellis happened to, in playing with him, by this time, Wynton had kind of burst on the scene, and with Art Blakey was playing classical music and playing jazz music and starting to get a lot of publicity and a lot of press. And so I asked, I said, "Ellis, is that the son you were talking about that played trumpet?" "Yes, that's him. That's him. That's just." And so I knew Wynton through his reputation from that. So fast forward about maybe about 3 years, I happened to be in London. I was doing a show called One More Time, and it was in London. And Wynton came through London with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And so they were playing at a club called Ronnie Scott's. And so I would go to Ronnie Scott's every night after my gig. My gig ended about 10 o'clock. So I would get to Ronnie Scott's about 10:30 and catch the late show of whoever was playing there. And during that time, I had never gone to New York, so I had never seen any major jazz artists live. So I made a beeline every night to Ronnie Scott's to check out whoever was playing there. It just so happened that Art Blakey happened to be there that week, and so I met Wynton in London as men. We were by this time we were men. We were in our we were in our early 20s, and so I met Wynton, and he introduced me to Art Blakey, and Branford happened to be, he was playing in the band as well. And so that's when I met Wynton really as men, as a man. I was playing the drums, he was playing the trumpet. And so later on, I was playing with, a few years later, a couple of years later, I was playing with Ahmad Jamal. I was playing at a club called Fat Tuesdays in New York. So Wynton came to the club to check out the band and hear us at Fat Tuesday. So he heard me playing with Ahmad Jamal, and I was playing a totally different style than I had played with One More Time. The One More Time show was a show that was based in the 1920s, where I had to play a lot of 1920s style music without the hi-hat, with just a snare drum and a bass drum, and playing choke cymbals and a lot of press rolls and a lot of tum-tums, and it was a whole wood blocks and all these kind of things. So it was a totally different style of playing, which was 1920s music. So when you heard me playing with Ahmad Jamal, it was Ahmad played more a modern style. He played modern, like with funk. He played like with funk music, funk beats. He played in odd times and odd meters. He also played swinging straight ahead. Mm-hmm. So Wynton heard me playing a lot of various styles. He heard me playing, many different types of styles as a drummer. And so it just so happened that in 1987, well, maybe 86 or 87, I can't remember. I was playing at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival with his dad, Ellis. And it was myself and Reginald Veal, the bass player. So Wynton came, he played the Jazz Fest that same year as well. And when he finished his set, he ran over to the set with his dad. And it just so happened that I was playing the drums and Reginald Veal was playing the bass, and Wynton sat in with us. And so when he sat in, we were playing like straight ahead, playing Ellis's music, playing some straight ahead stuff, playing some James Black music. And so when Wynton heard us playing, he really, and he sat in and played, he really, really liked the sound that, and the feeling of the rhythm section that with myself and Reginald. He liked the feeling of that and the sound that we were getting. He liked the whole experience of it. So later on, he had a conversation with his dad about hiring us. So he asked his dad, he said, "Man, can I hire these cats? Man, I like the way they play, man. With Herlin and Reginald, they sound good together. Would you have a problem if I hired them?" So Ellis was like, "Man, you hire who you want. They're freelance musicians. They can do, work. I don't have any ties to them. You hire, if you want to call them and hire and put them in your band, great." So it just so happened that about a year or so later, he called Reginald Veal. And that was December of 87, November of 87. Then in February of 88, he called me. Oh. So we joined the band, and we had a long-term relationship. We still have a relationship. We're like brothers, even now. I haven't been in the band for 15 years now. Wow. But we maintain a relationship as really good friends and brothers, now. I talked to Wynton 2 days ago. He just called. He said, "Man, I just called to see how you doing, bro. What's happening with you? What's going on? How you doing? How you making out? How you making out through this pandemic, man? How you surviving?" So we really have a true bond now, and so it just so happened that that was then, that's now, but that was from 1988 until I was with him from 1988 until 2005. That's 17 years. Wow. I played in the band with him. And during that time, we started out with a quintet, and then it grew to a sextet. Well, I'll tell you, the quintet was Wynton. Todd Williams was playing tenor saxophone. Marcus Roberts was playing the piano, Reginald Veal on bass, and myself. That was the original quintet that I played with him with. And then it augmented into a sextet, which with the addition of Wes Anderson. And then after Wes Anderson, it augmented again to a septet with Wycliffe Gordon, with the addition of Wycliffe Gordon. So the septet, so it became the Wynton Marsalis septet. And we played many gigs, and we rehearsed, and we recorded, played a lot of gigs together. And then from the septet, he developed a big band, which was the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. And he didn't use all of the guys from the septet at first. You know, eventually all of us became part of the septet. I mean, part of the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. But when the orchestra was first formed, it was Kenny Washington who was playing the drums. And eventually Kenny left, and he left the band, and they hired me as a drummer. And I remember doing the very first tour with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. And it just so happened that your father was in the band as well. Yes, your father. Umar Sharif, and back, his Christian name, of course, was Emery Thompson. But he happened to be in the band, and that was the very first tour that we did. And it had a lot of the Duke Ellington alumni was part of that band. Britt Whitman, Milt Grayson was the singer. Britt Whitman played the trombone. They had Norris Turner, who played the alto saxophone. I can't remember everybody's name right now, but it was a lot of the Duke Ellington alumni. And the music that we played during those early years was a lot of Duke Ellington music. So that was, and so now the Lincoln Center Orchestra has evolved, and they're doing a lot of Wynton's music. A lot of the guys who are in the band now are writing for the orchestra, and so that was the beginnings of that.
I feel like every time I do these, I don't necessarily want to call them interviews, but conversations, I feel like I'm in class all over again. But it's good. I mean, I'm hearing all these names, folks that I know from New Orleans, folks that used to come to the house, seeing all y'all share together, and other people who aren't even from New Orleans. But that just shows you how much of a rich culture we have in this industry. It travels, especially in New Orleans. Victor talked about the triangle, the triangle of jazz, Chicago, New York, New Orleans, because I think you also perform, because Victor's still with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. But the migration of that whole music triangle makes a lot of sense. And then a lot of those great cats came from our hometown.
Yes.
So I'm enjoying these long conversations, and I'm just letting y'all go because I'm enjoying every bit of it. Who would you say are some unsung New Orleans musicians that played a major role in your development?
Wow. There are so many. Willie T is one of them. That's one of Willie T. Willie T had a group called Willie T and the Gators. I was Willie T and the Gators. I was listening to a recording that I did with him. One of my first times being in the studio was with Willie T. And I listened to the recording the name of the tune is called Concentrate. And another tune, the flip, it was recorded on 45s. So that was a single, a 45, And the tune was called Concentrate, and that was one of the first tunes I recorded with him. The flip side was called Get Up. And so Willie T was definitely one of the great musicians that was around me, that influenced me, and that who's really is like an unsung hero, as you said. Willie T is definitely one of the guys. I would say Teddy Riley also. Teddy Riley I mentioned him when I was talking about my first encounter working with Ellis Marsalis. Teddy Riley was also one of these great musicians. There was another musician. His name was two guys. His name was Dave Fatman Williams, who he passed away. He wrote "I Ate Up the Apple Tree."
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, so I worked with him. I worked with also the Isidore Toots Washington. He was one of the musicians who was around, and I got a chance to work with him. Jesse Hill was my great uncle. He wrote a tune called "Ooh Poopa Doo." Ooh Poopa Doo. That's Trombone Shorty's grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah, he's Trombone Shorty's grandfather, and he you know, the relationship is my grandmother and and Trombone Shorty's grandfather were brothers and sisters. So that's the relationship. So it was so, you know, so I got to work with him. And Professor Longhair was another musician that was always at my grandmother's house and my grandparents' house, who was around. And, you know, I got to hear, you know, it was so many musicians that came through the house that was always at my grandparents' house. I didn't know, they was just people to me. And I didn't realize, you know, who they were as musicians. They was just guys that my uncles knew and that played with them, you know. So my Uncle Melvin, he and Harold Baptiste formed a record company called AFO Records.
That's right.
And yeah, from AFO Records, that's Willie T recorded for them. And so Tammy Lynn was also, she was a singer. She just passed away a couple of weeks ago. Tammy Lynn was a singer that was around, and who it was. I mean, there are so many musicians. I can't call everybody's name who touched me and who had an influence on my life. I just can't remember everybody. Maybe I have to sit down one day and just write everybody's names down, you know, who touched me and who was a part of my life. But yeah, Professor Longhair, he was another, you know, he wrote Big Chief. Well, he didn't write Big Chief. Earl King wrote Big Chief. But Professor Longhair is the one who's playing the piano. And, you know, he came to my grandparents' house, my grandmother's house. She had a piano at the house, and they had indentations in the piano where he used to kick the side of the piano, keeping time for himself. You know, so
that's interesting.
John was another musician who came to the house all the time. I got to work with Dr. John and got to be with him in his last years. I got to play in his band. But Dr. John was another musician who was always around and always, you know, who was always on the scene. I just, you know, these people were just around me, and I got to know Dr. John. His celebrity status didn't really come into play for me until much later in my life. He was just another guy that was just coming around the house.
Yeah, that's right. I can understand that. You know, I want to know, because I know you've had so many, and these questions I asked just kind of make you think. You know.
Yeah.
Can you share a couple of spiritual moments? You know, whatever way you want to look at it, when you were performing, came to you, and it just took you to this place that was just like, wow. You know.
Well, I tell you, this is a moment that really touched me. I was playing with Wynton, and we were playing in Colombia, South America. And this was a kid. I mean, this was a show for Amnesty International. It was a show for Amnesty International, and there were a lot of people. Sinead O'Connor was on the show. I think Sting was on the show. New Kids on the Block, they were on the show, and there were quite a few people who were on the show who had been playing to, you know, stadiums and, you know, these large houses and these in those kind of settings. Playing with Winston in the septet, you know, our average audience would be 2,000, 3,000 people. Right. So this particular performance for Amnesty International had about 80,000 people there.
Wow.
and it was in a soccer stadium, and there are people on the grounds, people in the stands, and we were on the stage. And so, you know, we looked at each other and were like, you know, as a septet, man, what are we going to play for all these people? And, you know, we don't, you know, this is not our typical crowd. You know, they're here to hear all this pop music and, you know, this kind of thing. And we're playing. So Wynton said, man, we're going to play a tune that was written by Jelly Roll Morton called the Jungle Blues. And the Jungle Blues is an old kind of tune, old kind of blues tune. And it's based in that 1920s kind of vibe. And so we started playing the song. And as we were playing the song, this blues, it was just no words or anything. The crowd started to sway back and forth, you know, and they were kind of swaying like that, back and forth. One side was going one way, the other side was going the other way. One line was going this way, and so then they had these candles, and they were swaying with the candles. You saw candles, and then they started singing, and they started singing a chant that they would sing at the soccer matches, and it fit perfectly over the blues that we were playing, and it was such a feeling. I mean, 80,000 people who were in tune with you, who were just singing and they're swaying and they're chanting, and it was like that was an overwhelming kind of moment. That was a great moment, and that's the moment I'll never forget. It was in Colombia, South America, for an international concert.
What year was that, Herlin?
Woo, that must have been about 1990,
Wow.
maybe 90 and 91. It was somewhere in that area. I can't remember exactly what year it was. It was somewhere around that time.
So you
can probably find it. I think it's online. I think it's online. You can see it. You can see it on YouTube. I think.
I'm gonna check that out. So I'm quite sure you had an out of body experience.
Well,
yeah.
That's happened to me several times. I can't remember. I can't actually recall anything as clearly as I recall that moment. That was a profound moment. But that, you know, music is a special thing, and when everything is in alignment, it's magic. It's a magic that happens, and you know, it's very spiritual because music touches you in a way that nothing else can. Music has a way of touching people and touching people deeply, so deeply that words can't explain it. And being a musician and working with some of the greatest musicians in the world, I've had experiences where it's been so magical and so spiritual and so uplifting. You know, all I can do is just be in the moment and just relish the moment. I can't exactly, and those times it doesn't happen all the time, and so you can't always pinpoint that particular. I can't always pinpoint when it actually happened. I just know that it happens, and then it comes and then it goes, and then you know. So it's like I can't put my finger exactly on it, but I know that it happened. Yeah. And music is such a it's a great as I said, it touches places inside of you that other things can't. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine. Her name is Susan Maisie, and her husband Dallas, I think his name is Dallas Smith. They formed a company where they've been going to hospitals. Susan plays the harp, and Dallas plays an instrument called the lyricon, which is based on it's like electronic saxophone kind of. And they've been going to and playing in hospitals. They've been doing this for 25 or 30 years now, where they go and play in hospitals and they play for comatose patients, people who are in a coma. And when they play the harp, when she plays the harp, and he's blowing these melodies over this lyricon, you can get a reaction out of people who are in a coma. he said sometimes they'll twitch their eyes or they'll smile or they may hold your hand or squeeze your hand or something, but they're in a coma, but the music is touching something that's really so deep inside of them that they have you can see a physical reaction that's going on with them. So music is a very, very powerful thing. And just like it can be used in a positive way, music can be used in a negative way as well.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
it can be used in a negative way as well. So as musicians, we're guardians of this art form, and we have to be very, very careful as how we use it, and how we use this art form. We can use it for edification, or we can use it for destruction.
You are so right. I mean, it's music is very spiritual. No matter
Yes.
how you may look at it, whatever your spirituality may be, you may not have one at all, but that music defines it some kind of way.
Absolutely. I
Touch
agree.
every sense of your being, you know,
Yeah.
taste, sound, everything, you know. And so I totally agree with you. So even if a person can't talk, you know, or can't hear. I mean, look at Stevie Wonder. People
That's
wonder,
right.
Stevie is not, you know, he's blind.
That's right.
It's spiritual. It's within him, and he got it going on. So
Oh,
it's,
yes, it
it's
does.
very spiritual. So there, you know, it does. I think that's a beautiful program, thing that your friends are doing. I'd like to know more about that as well.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, let me ask you something. You know, New Orleans has that sort of flavor, with our musicians. And on that note, what's your take on New Orleans music? And because you play the drums, could you also discuss the important role of drums in New Orleans, as well as globally?
Well, the drums in New Orleans is a very special instrument, um, because we had Congo Square. We had Congo Square, and as enslaved people here in this country,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Congo Square was the only place in North America where enslaved people were allowed to have drums. And the drumming that we had in Congo Square has been passed on through generations and generations of people who live here in New Orleans. Um, and so I feel very strongly that I'm a recipient. I'm standing on the shoulders of those people who came before me, who played in Congo Square. And so whenever anybody, the rhythm is always, the rhythm will define any kind of musical culture that you have.
Mm-hmm.
You play a certain rhythm, and it tells you, well, you say that sounds like, you play a reggae rhythm, to say, well, that sounds like Jamaica. Or you play, a samba rhythm, it sounds like Brazil.
Right.
Play, you can play rhythm that sounds like Puerto Rico, or Latin America. But New Orleans has its own groove too. And so when we play a groove that, we play the second line groove, that's New Orleans.
Right.
And when we play that groove, it's rooted in a certain kind of, there's a cadence that goes to it, but still there's a freedom in there, there's an expression that's also a part of it. And when you hear that rhythm, and you see people dance, that's such a freedom of expression. But it's within the confines and the parameters of a certain style.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see people dancing to the second line, everybody's doing their own thing, but it's still within the parameter of the second line groove, the rhythm. And also there's a certain kind of dance, there's a strut, there's a movement that's associated with that. And so I feel very fortunate coming, being born into this culture and being born as a drummer in New Orleans. One thing I also want to share is that the drum set as we know it would not exist had it not been for New Orleanians. And by that I mean there were two New Orleanians who got together and they invented something that made the drum set what it is. And it's D.D. Chandler and John Robichaux. And their invention was the bass drum pedal. foot pedal. Before the invention of the foot pedal, the drummers can only, the drums were played separately. One guy played the snare drum by itself. One guy put a bass, they strapped them on. They strapped on straps. They had the bass drum on the strap. They played the snare drum on the strap. And the cymbal was attached to the bass drum. So it took pretty much 3 people or 2 people to produce the sound of what we know as a drum set. When Dee Dee Chandler and John Robichaux got together, they invented the foot pedal. Once they attached the foot pedal to the bass drum, then that freed one guy. That meant that now one guy could do the job that 2 people were doing, and that was the key component to the development of a drum set as we know it now. So at the core of a drum set, you have a bass drum, a snare drum, and a cymbal.
Mm-hmm.
The other parts of it are all accessories. The hi-hat, the sock cymbal as they call it, the tom-toms, the floor tom, all the different gadgets, they're all accessories. The core of the drum set, the core is the bass drum, the snare drum, and the cymbals. And so once the foot pedal was invented, then one person could play all 3 of these instruments at the same time.
Wow. Man, I feel like I can go back to school again. I feel like I'm in a master's class, but a lot of folks don't know that story.
That's right. That's right.
A lot of folks, not just from New Orleans, but just in general, we can't take these instruments for granted.
That's right.
The trumpet, the clarinet, the saxophone,
Yeah.
and like you mentioned earlier, when you were a little one, how you used to take the butter knives and just start using that,
Mm-hmm.
So it's been transforming moment by moment, second by second, but it's doing what it's supposed to do. And a lot of times we really don't know the history. So I think that's a very important story, especially considering New Orleans and what we mean to where we are, but to the rest of the world, which is why people love us so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we've given our culture has influenced the culture of America. Period. Our dance, our freedom of expression, the rhythms and stuff that we play. Because even Louis Armstrong was the greatest ambassador to music that the world has ever known and will ever know.
Okay.
What he embodied as an artist, as a singer, as a trumpet player, as a personality. Period. It's unmatched. And today, that's been over. That's over 100 years old now. His influence. This is 1920, 2020. So back in the 20s, that's when Louis Armstrong was kind of bursting on the scene.
Yep.
And so, but his music and his influence is unmatched.
True.
He influenced the instrumentalists. He influenced the singers. He influenced just performers. Period. And it was all out of his virtuosity and also his freedom of expression.
Mm-hmm.
He's so free, And going back to what Mr. Jermaine said, he was emotionally naked. He just gave of himself, open up, and here I am. Here I am. Take me as I am. Take it or leave it. This is what I'm doing. And people gravitated toward him and embraced him and loved him just for who he was as a musician and as an artist.
Now you've shared that story with me before about Miss Basil. Could you share with everyone else? I thought you shared that with me earlier before the conversation, but about emotionally naked.
Okay, well, Miss Basil, for those of you who don't know, Miss Jermaine Basil is a great singer from New Orleans, from right here in New Orleans, and she's also an educator. She was also she worked for I don't know how many years in the school system. And one of the places that she taught was an all-girls school called Xavier Prep.
My alma mater.
Huh?
My alma mater.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, alma mater. So you know her well.
Yeah.
So Miss Jermaine, she's being in an all-girls school. She always carried herself in a very dignified way. In a very she looked like looked like royalty when she walks on the street, and she has this regalness about herself, and very classy and very with an upstanding image.
Yes.
Always, always, always dressed properly, always speaking properly, and always carrying herself in such a lady-like way. But when she's on the bandstand and she's performing, you know, a little bit of that goes out of the window because Miss Jermaine, she starts to roll her shoulders and she dances. She dances while she's singing and she's just so and she's just free. She you know that regalness kind of she still possesses this ladylike quality and this regalness about herself, but she has also this rattiness.
Yeah.
But for those of you, you know, I guess everybody should know what ratty is, huh? You know,
Yeah, they should have.
ratty is kind of being hip and just kind of just being, uh, you know, she say it again.
She,
Help me with that.
she's free in her own personal way.
Yes,
The difference. But I understand what you're saying.
yes. So I asked her one day. I came off the bandstand. I said, Miss Jermaine, you are so wonderful. I said, you know, when I see you, when you're not on the bandstand, you have this persona about yourself that you just, you know, you look like royalty. You just walk with this regalness about yourself. I said, but when you get to the bandstand, you just so ratty and you just dancing and you're rolling your shoulders and you know. And she said, let me tell you something, Herlin. If you really want to do this music and do it the right way, if you want to be a musician or be a jazz musician or do it, and you want to do it the right way, you have to allow yourself when you're doing it and you're performing to become emotionally naked. That you just give of yourself. You just open up and do what you do and be free. Don't be inhibited by anything. You just have to be emotionally naked. And that's where the term came from. And that really it set off a light bulb inside of me to understand, you know, who she was and what she meant, what she really meant about that. You know, the most beautiful thing about jazz and about being an artist is the honesty, the
Yes.
truth, the honesty that has to come through when you're performing and when you're playing. You have to be honest. You can't just do something, you know, thinking that, or who's looking at me, or I'm trying to get a paycheck, or I'm trying to, you know, get the woman, I'm trying to catch the girl, or I'm trying to get this guy to pay attention to me or something.
Mm-hmm.
None of that is important when you're performing. What's important is about your truthfulness and that thing that's inside of you. Are you giving of yourself to the music and to your performance? And that's what she was talking about. That giving of yourself and that truthfulness, and that honesty, it has to be a part of who you are when you do this music the right way.
And that's exactly what she said in the interview when I interviewed her, is when her ending marks were, you have to be honest. So you're right on point.
Well,
Have you worked on any films?
have I worked on any films? I've worked on a couple of films, and I guess the last one I did was a film called Up from the Streets, which
Okay.
was directed by Mike Murphy. And Terrence Blanchard was also a very strong influence on the film as well. It talked about New Orleans and New Orleans culture and the second line, and talked about the drumming of New Orleans, and I was a part of that. I did some drumming demonstrations, just demonstrating the different styles of drumming here in New Orleans and how it's grown over the years from, you know, playing the 1920 style to playing, you know, the 1930s, you know, with the big band, Papa Joe Jones kind of things, and then playing the rock and roll stuff with like Fats Domino, and
Mhm.
then playing modern styles with James Black's music and, you know, Winston's music. So I did some drumming demonstrations that kind of brought you through the history of jazz drumming.
Okay. Okay. You
Hmm.
earlier you mentioned my father, so I got to
Yeah.
like, when did you actually meet my dad? And what was the?
Well, dad, your dad's reputation always preceded him. You know, my uncles Melvin talked about your dad. When I got to high school I was playing in high school, and I was studying with Miss Yvonne Bush.
Mm-hmm.
She played the trombone, and she was my high school teacher, music teacher. She talked about your dad. Um, I heard stories about your dad from Alvin Baptiste and Harold Baptiste. But so I think I may have played a couple of jobs with your dad early on. But the most important thing about your dad that I come to find out um, that he really had a big influence on my career and my development. Um, it was back in I guess 1980, like 82. Um, he was playing at a hotel called the Roosevelt Hotel, and they had a room there called the Blue Room,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of the big band. Now in the Blue Room was a, a large lounge, which was based kind of like on a Las Vegas lounge,
Right.
based on the model of a Las Vegas lounge, where they would bring in people who played for a week to the Blue Room. They would bring in people like Ella Fitzgerald. They brought in like people like Joe Williams, or they brought in Lena Horne. They were bringing Ramsey Lewis, or they were bringing different musicians, and Sammy Davis Jr. would play there sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they had a big band that would kind of that would back these acts. So your dad happened to be in a big band. So this particular week they brought in Ahmad Jamal.
Mm-hmm.
So when Ahmad Jamal came in, um, he and your dad knew each other from Chicago.
That's right.
They're from Chicago, and so they were both Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
And Muslims, they had a camaraderie and they had a relationship. So this particular week, the drummer from Ahmad Jamal's band was leaving. He was leaving the band, and Ahmad needed someone, quickly. And Ahmad Jamal has always had an affinity for um, musicians or drummers from New Orleans. His very first drummer from here was Vernell Fournier,
That's right.
and I forgot his Muslim name, Emil Rushdan, I think, something like that.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And so he asked your dad, about, and your dad had a conversation. He said, "Well, who's a good drummer from New Orleans, man, that can possibly play with me and come on the road and play some gigs with me?" And your dad said, "I got just the guy for you." And so he said, "There's a young drummer. His name is Herlin Riley. So I'll give him a call and see if he's available, if he'd like to come work with you." So I got a call from your dad about 7 a.m. in the morning. It was like, so he said, "Hey, Herlin, wake up, wake up." I said, he said, "Hey, man." I said, "What's going on?" I said, "What's going on, Mr. Thompson?" He said, "Ahmad Jamal needs you, man. He needs you. He needs you." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Man, Ahmad Jamal wants to hire you." I said, "Man, it's too early. I don't want to play right now. It's too early. I don't play in the games." He said, "No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm serious." He said, "Ahmad Jamal wants to hire you. He needs you to come and play with him." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "So I'm gonna give him your number and have him call you." Sure enough, I get a call from about 20 minutes later. I get a call from Ahmad Jamal. He said, "Mr. Riley," he said, "I understand that you're a very fine drummer." He said, "Well, would you like to play some gigs with me, go on the road and play some gigs?" I was like, "Absolutely." I was like, "Yes, please call me." Yes. So during that time, we didn't have flights 2 weeks in advance. No, he got me a flight. He booked my flight, and I got some subs for my gigs around New Orleans, and I flew that very day, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I flew to Phoenix, Arizona, and we were playing at a place called the DoubleTree Hotel. Someone met me at the airport. No, I caught a taxi from the airport to the hotel where they were staying. I met Mr. Jamal in the lobby, and he said, let's go ahead and have a rehearsal because we have to play that night. So we sit down, set up. I played 2 songs with him. He said, that's good, you'll be all right. So I played 2 songs with him, and then at the end of the night, he said, hey man, would you like to work with me permanently? I was like, absolutely. So the drummer that he had, he let him go and he hired me.
Wow.
Right on the spot. You know, first he flew me, he took a chance on your father's word. In Phoenix, Arizona, bought me a ticket, flew me to Phoenix, Arizona. I worked that night with him, and then I stayed with him from that stint from 1982 until 1987. And that's why I joined Wynton's band. Then I worked with Wynton from 88 until 05. And then I joined Ahmad Jamal again in 09. And when I got with him in 09, my last gig I would have played with him would have been in January this year, but I couldn't do it. And, you know, then the pandemic hit. And so now he's retired, but I worked with him 2 stints. The first stint from 82 to 87, then the second stint from 89 until the present.
Talk about history. And he's 95 years old, isn't he?
He just turned 90. He just turned 90 in July.
I'm giving him extra age in 5 years. Wow.
But this man can still play like he's 25 years old. I kid you not.
Yeah, listen, I've witnessed it. Amazing.
He can really still play. So and that was the first time I had worked with an internationally known musician like of that caliber. Very first time. And so from working with him, I started traveling to Europe and to Japan and to different places around the world, and beginning to get more and more exposure. And that's how I got to work with Wynton, because I was with Ahmad Jamal, and Wynton heard me playing in that different kind of style than he had heard me playing earlier. So I owe a lot to your dad for just recommending me and having the faith and confidence in me to call me.
It's a blessing. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And so, and from your dad, I know your dad came from a long lineage of musicians. I know the Humphreys are, you're related to Percy and Willie Humphrey. And then your brother Jamil plays the trumpet, and then your son Jelani, and so the legacy goes on,
Yeah, and then I have a 19-year-old who's, he's not into that jazz scene, but he loves to sing and compose. So it's in us. I think I could have gone a little further playing the piano. Sometimes I think back like, man, why I didn't do that? But hey, it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody.
It's not too, even if you just play for your own enjoyment,
That's what I'll do. That's normally what I do, but I love it. I mean, it's important. This is one of the reasons why, this show is so important to me. It's so deep rooted, with all of our legacies are connected. And it's so important that we share these stories and that our children know and their children know, and it continues,
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
What's on the horizon for you?
Say again?
What's on the horizon?
Well, I'd like to continue to compose music and to continue to record and just being an influence to the younger musicians who are coming behind me. I have a lot of information, through my experiences, not necessarily through the books, because I didn't learn how to play the drums through the method book, or through having a teacher to sit down and we're gonna work on page 29 today and then we come back and do page 30 tomorrow. I didn't have that kind of teaching. My teaching came through the practical experience of playing the music and being in the moment and playing. And so as a result of doing that, I gained a lot of experience. I gained a lot of knowledge through the experiences of playing. Right. And so I'd like to share some of those experiences, not just as a drummer, but also as a musician and also as a father. also as a husband, you know, because as a it's not easy to maintain a marriage and maintain a family life and having a musical career as well. So it takes it takes a lot to do that.
I know.
And so I like to just be a mentor to as many people as I can, and as many younger people, and not from a musical perspective, and also from a life perspective.
I like that. I like the way you say that. It makes it, which goes to my next question. My last question to you is,
All
speaking
right.
of young people, what advice would you give young people today?
Well, I would first of all, as musicians. I mean, are you talking to young musicians or just young people?
Well,
Period.
here's the deal. Because you're a musician, two things: young artists and young people in general. Because we're all artists, no matter how we look at it.
Well, first of all, I would say you have to. For me, I would say as an artist, I'll go to that perspective first. As artists, you have to be true to yourself. Be true to to whatever that you're doing. You have to be true. Be true, and you know, everybody doesn't appreciate all art. Everybody, you know, you can't. So don't get into. I would say don't get into a habit of doing something just because you think it's going to be pleasing to somebody else. You know, as an artist, you have to, you know, be true to to yourself, to that spirit that's inside of you. As an artist, be true to that and produce, because you never know how things evolve and develop. And everything that, you know, has developed, and everything that's become profound, at one time nobody knew what it was, but somebody did it, and it caught on. So when you're true to yourself, and you're true to that spirit that's inside of you, you never know what you're going to do that's going to catch on. That's going to be the next big thing, or the next thing that's going to have a profound effect on the world. So be true to yourself as an artist. Um, Learn as much as you can about the information of the history of whatever you're going into, whether it being a drummer or a trumpet player or a clarinet or whatever. Learn the history of your instrument, or learn the history of your art. Learn if if you want to be a sculptor or whatever. Learn about, you know, Picasso or a painter or whatever. Learn as much about the history of what you're doing, and that would also propel you to get to the next level of what you're trying to get to. You know, it's like, you know, before they could fly to the moon, they just had to, you know, the Wright brothers had to just fly first. You
Mm-hmm.
had to just get, you know, so you know, so when they got off the ground, then they figured out how to get to the next level. So, but you have to have that, you know, there's a lot of things that's been laid out for us in the 21st century. So learn the history first of all, and then it would also give you the platform to get to the next level in your craft. Um, as just regular people and human beings, I, I would say find a spiritual base. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you know, and it's not about necessarily religion, but it's about a relationship with the higher power, with God, with our Creator.
Mm-hmm.
There is a Creator. There, you know, we couldn't. So that's find a base with that, with yourself. I'm not telling anybody to go into any specific religions or anything like that, but it's to have a relationship and have an acknowledgement, have an acknowledgement for the higher power, for God, have an acknowledgement for His creation and who He is, who God is, and also in our relationships with other people, just the simple golden rule applies: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You know, and if you do that, that covers so many bases. It covers bases. And I would also say that all relationships are a work in progress. They're a work in progress. You're not going to always see the eye to eye with anybody, whether it be a mother and father, a father and a son, a husband and wife, you know. But you look at if you look at the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish, then you can get over those small hurdles, you know, of a relationship. So the golden rule definitely applies in that area as well. So look at things sometimes not only through your own eyes and through your own prisms, but look at it through the prisms and the eyes of somebody else.
Those are some powerful words, not just for young people, but for older folks as well, for all of us. So I
Well,
appreciate you very much. I appreciate you, Herlin. Um,
thank you,
you know,
thank you so much, Selima.
oh man, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for your contributions to New Orleans and to all the different people that you have touched with your music. I hope that God continues to bless you and your family. And I want to keep in touch with you and find out what that horizon is and the next steps for you, because you're not finished for sure.
All right, darling.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate you. You know, you contacting me, reaching out to me to do this, and hopefully, you know, it'll touch somebody. You know, my words will touch somebody and be a positive influence in somebody's life.
Oh, I'm sure it will. All right, everyone, you have heard from Herlin Riley. This has been a great conversation. Until next time, tune in to Anything and Everything.